So you watched the first video, you learned the 3 steps, maybe you tried it and it worked for 5 minutes, then fizzled out, or maybe it felt forced, like you were following a script instead of actually connecting. Well, here's why. Those 3 steps, stop validating too fast, make observations, let silence breathe, they actually work. But they're just the surface. What I didn't tell you is what makes those moves actually land. The invisible layer underneath that separates guys who mechanically apply techniques from guys who make women feel something they can't explain. By the end of this video, you'll understand the psychology behind why those steps work, and more importantly, you'll know how to adapt them so they never feel fake. I'm about to show you the 3 hidden layers that make flirty conversations feel natural instead of rehearsed. But first, you need to understand something about female psychology that most guys get backwards. There's a reason your conversations die even when you think you're doing everything right, and it's not your fault. Drop a comment with the word layers if you've ever felt like you were following the steps but still not getting results. And if you want to skip the trial and error entirely and learn exactly what she's thinking when she goes cold or plays games, grab my book, The Truth Detector, from the first link in the description. It breaks down the psychological patterns women can't hide. You'll know if you're wasting your time in the first 5 minutes. Most guys think flirting is about what you say, so they memorize lines, they practice teases, and then they wonder why it feels awkward. But here's what they're missing. Flirting isn't about the words, it's about the frame you're operating from when you say those words. I was at a coffee shop when I noticed this guy talking to a girl. He was doing everything right on paper. She mentioned she was a graphic designer. He teased her about fonts. She laughed. He made an observation about her being a perfectionist. He let a pause sit. Everything I taught in the first video, but after 10 minutes, she started giving shorter answers, checking her phone. 5 minutes later, she left. No number exchange. He looked confused, but I caught it. The problem wasn't his technique. The problem was his energy. Every time he teased her, there was this subtle neediness underneath it, like he was teasing because he was supposed to, not because he actually found her amusing. When he made that observation, his tone was trying to impress her with how perceptive he was, and she felt all of it, because women don't just hear your words, they feel your intent. And if that energy is needy, if it's trying too hard, if it's operating from, I need her to like me, the attraction dies. This is what I call frame control. It's the first hidden layer. Frame is the invisible context you're operating from. And here's what most guys get backwards. You don't create attraction by trying to impress her. You create it by being genuinely entertained by the interaction itself, regardless of whether she likes you or not. When you tease her because you think you're supposed to create challenge, you're operating from her frame. But when you tease her because you genuinely find the situation amusing, you're operating from your own frame. And she feels that difference immediately. Think about it like this. Imagine you're talking to a kid. A 5-year-old says something silly and you laugh and tease them. Are you doing that to make the kid like you? No, you're doing it because the situation is genuinely funny. That's the energy women respond to. Not the energy of a guy trying to win her over, but the energy of a guy who's already enough. But here's where most guys lose it. They hear be outcome independent and think that means acting cold. So they overcompensate. They're being dismissive instead of playful. Therefore, frame control isn't about not caring. It's about caring more about your own experience than her approval. I have a friend, Marcus, and I watched him talk to a woman at a bar. She mentioned she was training for a marathon. Instead of validating her, he smiled and said, "So you're one of those people who pays money to torture yourself for fun." She laughed, started explaining why she likes running. But here's what made it work. Marcus wasn't teasing her to create attraction. He was genuinely amused. You could see it in his face. And when she asked if he'd ever run a marathon, he said, "Hell no, I'd rather fight a bear. At least that ends faster." She almost spit out her drink laughing. See what happened there? The frame was, I'm not trying to be your perfect match. I'm being myself. That frame made everything he said land differently. So how do you develop this? Before you start a conversation with a woman, ask yourself, what would make this interaction fun for me, regardless of what she does? Not, what do I need to say to make her like me? Make that your frame. I started doing this and it changed everything. I'd walk into conversations conversations thinking, I wonder if she can keep up, instead of I need to impress her, and the shift was immediate. Conversations became fun instead of stressful. Women leaned in more. They invested more. Not because I was doing anything different on the surface, but because the energy underneath had shifted. Now here's the second layer most guys miss. Even if you nail the frame, even if you're operating from that genuinely confident place, there's still something that kills conversations, and it's this: not knowing when to push and when to pull. I've seen it happen dozens of times. A guy will be killing it, she's laughing, she's engaged, and then he just keeps pushing, keeps teasing, keeps challenging, and at some point she stops playing along. Not because the teasing was wrong, but because he didn't know when to let her win. This is what I call emotional rhythm. Think about music. A song isn't just one constant beat. It has highs and lows. It builds tension, then releases it. Conversations work the same way. If you're constantly challenging her, constantly creating tension, it becomes exhausting. She'll enjoy it for a while, but eventually she'll tap out. Here's what this looks like. You tease her about something. She defends herself. She's laughing, engaged. That's the push. But then instead of immediately teasing her again, you pull. You give her a moment of genuine validation. Not fake, not over the top, just a simple acknowledgement. Something like, okay, I respect that, or fair enough, you made a good point. That's the pull. And that pull is what makes the push work, because now she knows the challenge isn't personal. It's playful. I learned this the hard way. About a year ago, I was talking to this girl at a party. We were vibing. I was teasing her about her taste in music. She was firing back, but I kept going. Every response she gave, I found something to challenge, and I could see it happening in real time. Her smile started to fade. Her responses got shorter. I lost her. Not because I did anything explicitly wrong, but because I didn't give her any wins. I didn't balance the push with the pull. The rhythm was off. It was all tension, no release. And tension without release doesn't create attraction. It creates frustration. So after that night, I started paying attention to rhythm. After you tease her or challenge her, watch her reaction. Not just what she says, but how she says it. Is she still smiling? Is she leaning in? If yes, you can keep pushing. But if you see her start to qualify herself harder, if her tone shifts from playful to defensive, that's your signal. Pull back. Give her a win. And the pull can't be generic. It has to be specific. It has to show that while you were teasing her, you were also actually paying attention. So instead of just saying, I'm just messing with you, you say something like, okay, I see what you mean. You actually think about this stuff more than most people. There's actually research behind this. Psychologist Robert Cialdini talks about the principle of consistency and commitment in his book, Influence. When someone invests effort into something and then receives validation for that effort, it creates a bond. They become more committed because they feel like their investment paid off. So when you make her work a little, then validate that work. You're triggering a pattern that makes her want to invest more. But here's the key. The validation has to be real. If she senses you're just saying it to trick her, it backfires. Let me tell you about something that happened at a wedding last summer. I was talking to one of the bridesmaids. We'd been going back and forth for maybe 10 minutes. I'd teased her about being the responsible friend who probably plans everything. She laughed, but then she told me a story about how she organized this whole surprise trip for her best friend's birthday, coordinated 6 people's schedules, kept it secret for 2 months, and I could tell this actually mattered to her. So instead of making another joke, I pulled back. I said, that's actually impressive. Most people can't even keep a secret for 2 days. And her whole energy shifted. She lit up, started telling me more. That pull opened her up. It made her feel safe to show me something deeper. And that's what rhythm does. The push keeps things playful. The pull creates trust. You need both. Now here's the third layer, and this is the one almost nobody talks about, but it's what determines whether she thinks about you 3 days later or forgets you the moment the conversation ends. I call it unresolved tension. Most guys think the goal of a conversation is to resolve everything, to answer all her questions, to make sure she knows exactly how you feel. And that's the biggest mistake you can make, because the human brain doesn't obsess over things that are resolved. It obsesses over things that are incomplete. There's a psychological principle called the Zeigarnik effect, discovered by a Russian psychologist back in the 1920s. She noticed that waiters writers could remember complex orders perfectly while they were working on them, but the second the order was delivered, they forgot everything. The incomplete task stayed in their mind. That same principle applies to attraction. When everything about you is clear, when she has you completely figured out, her brain stops thinking about you. But when something's unfinished, when there's a question you didn't answer, when there's a moment that felt charged but never got resolved, that's what loops in her mind. So here's what this looks like. You're having a great conversation, everything's flowing, and then, right when things are getting really good, you create a gap. Not by being cold, but by leaving something unsaid, by hinting at something deeper without fully explaining it. About 6 months ago, I was at a rooftop bar. Started talking to this girl about risk taking. She told me about this trip she took to Thailand by herself. I could tell she was proud of it. So I did the push-pull. I teased her. Then I said, "You've got that energy. Like you're not scared of uncomfortable situations." She asked what I meant. And here's where most guys would explain. But I didn't. I just smiled and said, "I'll tell you later." Then I changed the subject. Watch what just happened. I opened the door, let her see that there was something specific I noticed about her, and then I closed it before she could walk through. That created tension. Now there's something incomplete in her mind, a question without an answer. 20 minutes later, in the middle of a completely different topic, she circled back to it. "So what did you mean earlier?" She brought it up. She's the one chasing the resolution, and that's the power of unresolved tension. But here's where guys mess up. They think creating mystery means being vague about everything. So they give non-answers to every question, and that doesn't create intrigue, it creates annoyance. Therefore, unresolved tension only works when it's strategic. You can't leave everything hanging. You have to give enough that she knows the conversation is real, but you hold back just enough on specific things that make her curious. The key is that the gaps you create have to be meaningful. They can't be random. The gaps have to be in places where she's genuinely curious, where the answer actually matters to her. So you're looking for moments where she's invested, where she's leaning forward, where she actually wants to know more. That's when you create the gap. That's when you give her 70% of the answer and hold back the last 30%. Now here's what's crazy. When you start applying these 3 layers, frame, rhythm, and tension, you'll notice something. Women start doing things that don't make sense on the surface. She'll text you something random days later. She'll bring up something you said weeks ago. She'll act cold one day and warm the next. And this is where most guys lose the game. They can't read what's actually happening. They think she's playing games, or they think she's not interested, or even worse, they chase harder when they should pull back. But the truth is, she's testing to see if your frame is real. She's seeing if you'll break. And if you want to understand what every single one of these tests means, what she's actually communicating when she goes quiet, when she cancels plans, when she says one thing but does another, that's exactly what the truth detector breaks down. First link in the description. It gives you the decoder for every psychological game women play. Not so you can manipulate, but so you can see clearly and respond with power instead of confusion. You'll stop wasting months on women who were never serious and start recognizing the ones who actually want you. So let's bring this full circle. You might be thinking, how do I actually practice this? Here's what I did. For 3 months, every conversation I had with a woman, I couldn't focus on the outcome. My only job was to pay attention to the 3 layers. Am I operating from my frame or hers? Is my rhythm balanced, or am I all push or all pull? And am I creating any unresolved tension, or am I explaining everything to death? That's it. Those were my only success metrics. The first week was brutal. I caught myself constantly slipping back into outcome-focused thinking, but every time I noticed that, I'd reset. Week 2, it started getting easier, but week 3, something clicked. The conversation started feeling different, more natural, more fun. By the end of 3 months, I didn't have to think about the layers anymore. They became automatic. And that's what I want you to understand. These aren't techniques you add on top of your personality. They're ways of showing up that become part of how you naturally interact once you understand them. The frame isn't something you fake. It's genuinely caring more about your own experience than her validation. The rhythm isn't something you calculate. It's naturally balancing challenge with acknowledgement because you're actually paying attention to her responses. The unresolved tension isn't manipulation. It's just not over-explaining everything because you're comfortable with mystery. So here's what I want you to do. Next conversation you have with a woman, forget about the 3 steps from the first video. Don't think about teasing or observations or silence. Instead, ask yourself 3 questions. Am I enjoying this interaction regardless of what she thinks of me? That's your frame check. 2, am I giving her moments to breathe and feel validated validated, or am I just challenging her non-stop? That's your rhythm check. 3. Am I explaining everything she asks about, or am I leaving some threads open? That's your tension check. Those 3 questions will tell you everything you need to know about whether you're creating attraction or just going through the motions. And here's the thing, you're gonna mess this up. You're gonna have conversations where your frame slips and you catch yourself trying too hard. You're gonna push without pulling and watch her energy drop. But that's okay. That's part of the process. The guys who get good at this aren't the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones who notice the mistakes in real time and adjust. That's the skill, not perfection, awareness. But here's what nobody tells you about this process. Getting good at the layers doesn't just change how women respond to you. It changes how you see yourself. Because when you stop operating from a place of needing validation, when you start showing up in conversations just to enjoy them rather than to win something, you realize something powerful. You don't actually need her approval. And that realization is what actually makes you magnetic. Not the techniques, but the inner shift. So here's my challenge to you. For the next 2 weeks, don't focus on flirting. Don't focus on creating attraction. Just focus on being someone you'd want to hang out with. Do things that make you feel alive. Have conversations where you're genuinely curious about people, not trying to impress them. Build your life in a way that when someone asks what you've been up to, you actually have interesting things to say. And then, after those 2 weeks, go talk to a woman you find attractive. But don't try to flirt. Just talk to her like you talk to anyone you find interesting. Ask her questions because you actually want to know the answers and see what happens. I'm willing to bet it goes better than any interaction where you were in your head trying to execute perfectly, because she's going to feel something different. She's going to feel like she's talking to someone who doesn't need anything from her, someone who's just enjoying the moment, and that feeling is rarer than you think. Most guys she meets are trying so hard, they're performing, but you're different, not because you learned some secret technique, but because you did the work of becoming someone who doesn't need external validation to feel whole. And if you want to take this deeper, if you want to understand not just how to create attraction, but how to read her real intentions from the very first conversation, check out The Truth Detector one more time. Links in the description. It's the missing piece that most guys never figure out. Knowing when she's genuinely interested versus when she's just killing time. You'll save yourself months of confusion and wasted energy. You don't get her attention by chasing it. You get it by becoming the kind of man she can't stop thinking about. So click here to watch this video next. I'll see you there.